Content warning for the squeamish. The Terrifier movies are quite well known for their excessive gore, so viewer discretion is advised. Hi, my name is Jared Jenkins. Oh yeah, I kicked them out. Huh. What am I going to do with you two?
Throw us out in the junkyard?
You know what? Yeah, that's not such a bad idea. You know what? Get out of here. Yeah, well, don't let the door hit you in the ass on the way out. Oh well, they were contaminating this room with their inferior taste anyway. I mean, Snow White, really? Like, really? The live-action Snow White? Like, come on. So I decided, why not instead review a movie that couldn't be any further from a traditional Disney movie? What about the Terrifier series? When we really start the story, we see it's with two girls named Tara and Dawn on Halloween night, and it takes place in the town of Miles County. So they're at a pizzeria, keep in mind after attending a Halloween party, and Dawn is wasted out of her mind. So they see Art the Clown staring at them, to which Dawn has the oh-so-bright idea to go up to this complete creepy-looking stranger and take selfies with him. So anyway, as Tara has to find a bathroom to use, and she asks a pest control worker if she can go inside this abandoned apartment building, to find a restroom. Meanwhile, as she goes in, Dawn ends up kidnapped by Art. And, well, a lot of the film, at least the first film, ends up being the sort of cat and mouse chase. At the end of the first Terrifier, Art ends up attempting suicide with a revolver and shooting himself in the head. Although at the end of the film, it's revealed that somehow supernaturally he survived, which leads into the events of Terrifier 2. There's also the little pale girl entity, whose name isn't properly known. But anyway, in Terrifier 2, she takes the form of Emily Crane, who, like I said, was implied to be one of Art's victims. It's explained that essentially she's what's keeping Art alive, and that if someone evil dies, then therefore this allows an evil spirit or a demon to roam the earth, and basically keep that said evil person alive, or keep them immortal. However, there's also a counterbalance, and said counterbalance is Sienna Shaw, introduced in Terrifier 2. And that, basically, for evil, there must be a counterforce of good. So Art the Clown himself, well, we don't know too much about him, for example, his backstory. But yeah, needless to say, he's not exactly the most pleasant guy in the room. Because, I mean, for example, in Terrifier 2, we see him laughing at a newspaper headline at a car crash that kills a family. And not to mention, he's quite a showman when it comes to the art of killing his victims. We also see that he has quite the twisted sense of humor, similar to Freddy Krueger, and it's also implied in Terrifier 2 from a newspaper headline showing that he killed a girl named Emily Crane, and straight up shown at the beginning of Terrifier 3 that children aren't exactly off his list. So anyway, what he looks like, well, we don't really know what his face looks like behind the makeup, but he's best described as a sociopathic mime. I mean, he has a huge hooked nose, which we don't even really know is prosthetic in universe. We also see that in at least the first two, he seems to have an obsession with bodily waste. He's also tied to an entity known as the Little Pale Girl, who in Terrifier 3 takes the form of Victoria Hayes, who was Tara's sister in the first one and actually was the disfigured survivor at the beginning of the first film. To get into Tara Hayes and Dawn, The thing is, there's not really much to them. I feel like the first Terrifier was sort of like the weakest in the trilogy because of that. I mean, it's more of a, like I said, cat and mouse game. And not to mention, there's a bit of a bait and switch where Tara gets killed off halfway through. And, okay, I gotta do a bit of a rant about this. So anyway, she actually manages to get the upper hand on Art by actually, like, beating him up with a bat, if I remember. And, however, instead of finishing him off, she's just like, get up, get up. Which gives the Art the opportunity to basically, like, shoot her. And it isn't quick. He shoots her multiple times before she dies. With Victoria, earlier on in the film, Tara actually called her to pick her up. And, yeah, let's just say it was the wrong place at the wrong time. Because she, too, ends up getting ensnared in Art's little game. So with Tiana Shaw, I think she's by far the most interesting character in the trilogy. Because, like, when we first see her, it's clear that her family is still mourning the passing of her father, Michael, after he commits suicide by driving into a transformer. And so anyway, like, her and her brother Jonathan live with, like, their mother, who is an alcoholic. I'd like to talk a little more about Victoria because, again, in the first film, there wasn't much to her. Although in the third film, we do get a little more after she's possessed, like, by the entity at the end of Terrifier 2.
What do you think is the motive behind the actions of Art the Clown?
That's hard to describe. Because, like I said, we don't have the entire picture of things like, for example, his backstory. I mean, in the first film, he was seemingly just a human serial killer up until the moment he died. And I think what makes him so intriguing is that we don't know yet.
Why do you think Art shot himself in the first film?
Well, because he was cornered by police. And keep in mind that when he shot himself, it was confirmed that he didn't know he would be revived.
So you think he would rather die than face the consequences of his actions?
Well, yeah. But then again, that's sort of taken away by the fact that not even things like, for example, being decapitated at the end of the second film and being impaled on a sword at the end of the third film were enough to fully stop him. Because he kind of becomes aware of the fact that, oh wait, as long as this other entity is around, I can't die.
How do you think Sienna changed throughout the films?
Well, that one's like a bit easier. Because at the beginning of Terrifier 2, while she is still dealing with the loss of her father, Michael, she is relatively normal, so to speak. However, the events of that film end up changing her as a person, because literally her friends each get murdered one by one in some pretty horrific ways. And she's trying to save her brother Jonathan from Art, as he's being held at a amusement park attraction known as the Terrifier. And yeah, she literally gets the crap beaten out of her. And so she's essentially at one point thrown into a portal, what is essentially a portal to hell. And it sort of like represents her own personal hell in that it's referencing a dream or nightmare sequence she has earlier on in the film about a place known as the Clown Cafe. She's in a dunk tank and she seems to drown. However, Art makes a mistake of throwing the sword that her father made for her down along with it. And so anyway, this sword sort of allows her, like I said, to act as Art's counterbalance. In that, when she dies, the sword actually revives her with some sort of angelic power. When she's revived by some sort of angelic energy that emanates from the sword, she finds the strength to climb out of the dunk tank and out of the portal, where she finally manages to challenge Art to a fight and decapitates him with a few swings of the sword. And in Terrifier 3, we see that 5 years later, she's extremely rattled by the events of what happened that Halloween night. And so she's returning to spend Christmas Eve with her aunt and uncle and her cousin Gabby. like, as much as art has utterly ruined her life, she's still very resilient. Because, like, at the end of the third film, Aunt Jess gets killed by being forced to swallow rats. So anyway, as Sienna is fighting Art after managing to break free, she opens up a gift which is said to be from Gabby. Though in reality, it's actually the sword that Sienna went to retrieve from the Terrifier earlier on. And so, like, as she opens it, she says, "Best gift ever." And then literally, like, she fights Art, literally doing, like, Buffy-style backflips. And just as she seems to have him pinned against the wall with the sword, a portal to hell opens up underneath the house. And Gabby falls in. Sienna ends up grabbing the sword and tries to get it, and tries to have Gabby grab onto the handle. However, like, not only does this allow Art an opportunity to escape, albeit without the entity that was, like, keeping him immortal, but Gabby ends up falling into the portal along with the sword. However, as hopeless as this might seem, all hope is not lost as Sienna removes the crown of thorns from her head. And she sees that, all of a sudden, like, her broken and lacerated hands are actually healing, meaning that God is on her side. And it's setting up the fact that in Terrifier 4, she's going to adventure into hell itself to save her cousin. Because, like, her cousin was actually the main thing that was keeping her from being possessed by the little pale girl entity. Because, like I said, it kept her resilient and basically gave her a reason to keep going.
So it seems like there's some ties to this sword and her loved ones that's kind of like a running theme.
Her father Michael actually crafted the sword for her. In Terrifier 3, there's a dream sequence that implies that the sword was actually, like, the work of both heaven and hell itself. At first she thinks it's just like a gift, but little did she know that her father, despite everyone thinking that he went crazy with saying that he was having all these visions, was actually having these premonitions. Like, for example, in his sketches, he draws a picture of Sienna holding the decapitated head of Satan. And keep in mind, in the drawing, she's dressed up as a battle angel named Valkyrie. So coincidentally, at the end of Terrifier 2, guess what her Halloween costume is? Valkyrie. And she ends up decapitating Art, like I said, with the sword. And by the end of Terrifier 2, Art is so blood splattered that he sort of resembles Satan.
Would you say that God versus Satan is the theme of this?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. If you were writing the screenplay, would you change anything?
For 2 and 3, no. But the thing is, as I said before, I find the first film is the weakest of the trilogy. And not to mention, that is so stupid. I mean, yeah, like, she has, like, no sense of danger. She goes up to this obvious creep and just, like, takes selfies with him. Like, who does that? And I guess there's, like, also the thing of Tara not killing Art when she had the chance.
That seems to be a common occurrence in horror and thriller movies.
Yeah, especially slashers.
Do you think that's part of what makes the movie?
Well, obviously they need a sequel.
If you could create the fourth movie in the Terrifier series, where would you go with it?
I don't know, because I'm pretty satisfied with Terrifier 2 and 3. So I trust that Damien Leone will be able to follow up on that cliffhanger at the end of the third film. I think it's pretty cool that we're going to actually see what hell in the Terrifier universe looks like.
Clearly, the Terrifier series is not for everyone.
No.
What do you think is the appeal of the Terrifier series?
I would say it's the amazing special effects work. At least that's part of it. I would also say another reason is that the Terrifier movies are sort of a throwback to 70s exploitation and 80s splatter horror. If I had to best describe how they feel, it's like a horror film from the 80s, but made in the modern day. Although the first film veers more into that 70s exploitation vibe with that sort of, like, weird film grain look. In Terrifier 2, it has more use of pastel colors and brightly colored blood, In fact, similar to what Tom Savini did for, like, Dawn of the Dead and Terrifier 3, it's sort of like a mix of the two styles, where you have the bright colors of 2, but a sort of grainy look of the first film. I just find the mystery behind art to be very intriguing. And also, I find that Sienna Shaw, it might just be one of my favorite final girls in horror cinema. I mean, let's be honest. And it feels like they took a lot of the best aspects of other final girls, like, for example, like a Nancy Thompson from Nightmare on Elm Street. And to me, like, she ranks up there with some of the best.
Now it's time for Jared's tantalizingly terrifying tidbits.
Originally, the first Terrifier was going to be an adaptation of Damien Leone's 2009 short film, The Ninth Circle. And the premise was that 3 teenagers were being hunted by demons in an abandoned hospital. There's even a trailer from 2012 for this version of the film. And Art the Clown's first appearance was in the short film, where he was a cult member. Initially, Damien Leone was looking to fund the hacksaw scene from the first Terrifier through Indiegogo and wanted to attach a well-known actor, but he failed to meet his goal. But Phil Falcone swooped in to fill in the rest of the necessary funds, like some sort of unsung hero. David Howard Thornton was actually an understudy for Stefan Karl Stephenson, best known as Robbie Rotten from Lazy Town, and used this as inspiration for his performance as Art the Clown.
Don't let your kids watch it!
Jenna Cannell, who played Tara Hayes, was actually tied to a chair for a few hours, saying that she was doing it to understand the mindset of women who had to go through similar things. YouTuber Leah Voicey would initially audition for Sienna Shaw, then Allie and Brooke, but Terrifier 2's producer Jason Levy instead gave her the role of the Clown Cafe host, since she's a skilled singer, and Voicey even plays a nurse at the end. In the UK, home of the video nasties, Terrifier 2 was released straight to video due to being considered too extreme for UK cinemas, but will get a theatrical release alongside the first film in 2024. Originally, the ending would have had Art emerging from the back of Victoria Hayes' head, but this was too similar to the film Malignant, and Damien Leone was grateful that the ending was scrapped, as he intended to do more with Vicky in Terrifier 3. Heather Langenkamp, best well known as Nancy Thompson from Nightmare on Elm Street, was planned to play Barbara Shaw, Sienna and Jonathan's mother, but couldn't due to schedule conflicts. This is funny considering Sienna's relationship with her mother is similar to Nancy and her mom. For Allie's death scene, they made a life-size dummy and used rods and tubing to simulate movement in the scene where Allie's mother walks in and sees her somehow still alive, and digitally imposed Casey Arnett's face on it to simulate facial expressions. Terrifier 3 grossed $90.3 million at the box office against a $2 million budget, becoming the highest-grossing unrated film of all time. The scene where Jess Shaw was forced to swallow rats was going to be even more extreme, but David Howard Thornton feared he wouldn't be able to get through it without vomiting. Several big studios wanted to finance the film after the success of Terrifier 2, but Leone turned them down as he felt there was no way they'd let him film the opening scene alone. Instead, he prefers to finance his films independently and do the special effects himself to keep costs low. At the end, the woman on the bus is reading a novel called The Ninth Circle by fictional author Rosemary Castevet, not only referencing Leone's short film, but the author's name references characters from Rosemary's Baby. Terrifier 3 is the first film to receive an 18H rating in France since Saw 3. Terrifier 3 was directly inspired by a story from Tales from the Crypt called And All Through the House, which had a mental patient dressed as Santa and go on a killing spree.
I guess that's it for Jared's tantalizingly terrifying tidbits. Whoa!
Okay guys, now it's time to do our sign-off. Okay, it's me, Mason here. And, I got a problem. You wanna know what the problem is? Jared expects us to review this movie, but I've never even seen it before. I mean, seriously. You're telling me that Brooke thought it was a good idea to take selfies with a guy who's very clearly a creepy-looking clown in a pizza restaurant. I just tuned out of the movie after that. I have to agree with Mason. I didn't much care for the Terrifier movies. Do you mind if maybe next week we do a romantic comedy instead? No, I'm not doing a romantic comedy. You're not into those. Yeah, let's agree never to have Jared choose another movie again. I mean, come on. At least pick a movie we've all seen. Well, I'm sorry that some of us have actual taste. Okay, 1, 2, 3, Critical 3. Oh, God, I'm lonely.